of blessing and a chance for us to be united in our support for others and also to have a time of prayer at home. We continue our series following Jesus, and this morning we're looking at peace in the storm, and we are in Luke chapter 8, verses 22 through 25. One day Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side of the lake." So they got in a boat and set out. As they sailed, he fell asleep. A squall came down on the lake, so the boat was being swamped, and they were in great danger. The disciples went and woke him up, saying, "Master, Master, we're going to drown." He got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waters. The storm subsided, and all was calm. "Where is your faith?" Jesus asked his disciples. In fear and amazement, they asked one another, "Who is this? He commands even the winds and water," and they obeyed. Now, Lord, bless this word to our hearts and minds this morning. Well, as Tamara mentioned, it's Lent. We're in the midst of 40 days of Lent, and I was thinking about storms, and the two kind of came together as I thought about Noah, who was in the boat for 40 days, and it was safety, but I wonder, they did feel a lot of cabin fever. And so we think about the Lent being 40 days and Noah in the ship for 40 days, as well as Jesus being in the wilderness for 40 days. But I found this as a great sort of insight, I thought, in our present times, and it's entitled, "Everything I Needed to Know I Learned from Noah." Number one, don't miss the boat, unless, of course, it's a cruise ship right now. Number two, we're all in the same boat, so let's help each other out. Number three, plan ahead. It wasn't raining when Noah built the ark. But listen, you don't need to take all the toilet paper in the store. Leave some for everybody else. Number four, stay fit. When you're 600 years old, someone may ask you to do something really big. Number five, don't listen to the critics. Just do the job that needs to be done. Number six, build your future on high ground. Number seven, for safety's sake, travel in pairs, but stay 6 feet apart. Number eight, speed isn't always an advantage. The snails were on board with the cheetahs. Number nine, when you're stressed, float for a little while. Or if you can't float, just relax in the living room a little bit. Number 10, remember the ark was built by amateurs, like Titanic by professionals. So we all have a job we can do. And finally, number 11, no matter the storm, when you're with God, there's always a rainbow waiting. And I like that. There's always a rainbow waiting. As a matter of fact, we here in the Midwest have experienced some storms overnight and even this morning. And I imagine there's a number of places where there's a rainbow. It may even have broken out during one of our worship services this morning. And I wonder, as I think about that storm that Noah was in, that God saw him safely through and then saw the promise of the rainbow as a symbol of God's love and care for us. I wonder if there was a rainbow after that storm that the disciples were in. Well, in any case, most of us seem to feel like we're in a storm right now with this COVID-19 pandemic, and there's lots of winds and waves in one way or another. And so I think this story of Jesus and the disciples in the storm speaks volumes of truth to us today. And so I invite us to walk back into the story. And we're told that Jesus and the disciples, after some stressful ministry, got into a boat. And we know it was about a 30-foot boat, probably about 8 to 10 feet wide. And they went out into the Sea of Galilee. Now we know even from today that the Sea of Galilee is a sea that is prone to storms and they can move in quite swiftly. So even if you're a seasoned sailor, you can find yourself in the throes of a desperate storm rather easily. And so it was this case that a storm blew up. We're told that Jesus was asleep amidst the winds and the waves, and in this storm, the boat began to be swamped, which means the waves were coming over the boat, which is never a good thing. And the disciples looked over at Jesus, and he was fast asleep. Now, I wonder in your own life, if you ever had a time, a moment when you felt like God was asleep, that God wasn't noticing what was going on in your life, and you may even be in a moment like that right now. But the disciples cried out in prayer to Jesus, "Master, Master, save us." And Jesus woke, we're told, and commanded the storm, "Peace, be still," and the winds and the waves calmed down. And the disciples were amazed at that moment and said, "Who is this that commands even the winds and the waves?" So the first thing that I see in this story this morning is that we all have sort of a choice. And one of the choices we can make is between fear or faith. And I encourage us this morning to choose faith over fear. The disciples were full of fear for good reason. The storm could easily have swamped the boat completely. The boat could have went down. But they could have also had a moment where they had faith in the Lord. And because of what Jesus did, they gained faith. I imagine for the rest of their lives, when they went through some of the storms, personal storms, trials, difficulties, even persecution, that moment came back to their mind and they realized that Jesus could speak into that moment, whatever the storm was in their life, and say, "Peace, be still." And Jesus probably wasn't just talking to the storm, the winds and the waves. Jesus was probably talking to the interior hearts of the disciples. "Peace, be still." And so they experienced faith instead of fear. And in our own lives, we have that choice as well. As I was listening to much of the news, of course, many of us are almost obsessed with the news. I myself watch the news a number of times a day. And it's easy to feel some fear when you think of the things that are happening with the present COVID-19 pandemic. But I was interested when I listened to Governor Holcomb this past week, the governor of Indiana, as he gave his address. And one of the major points that he said is that an essential service is churches offering online worship. And I really thought that was a great thing for him to say, because I think that he realized that faith is important in the midst of this moment, because there's so much fear out there. And so you and I this morning, we're trying to offer a word of faith, but you and I all have a choice today. Can we choose faith over fear? It's something not only for ourselves, but I think for our children and our families as well. One of the stories I love in the Bible, one of the scriptures I love, is Paul is up in years and he's in prison, and he's writing his protege in the faith, Timothy, who he's mentored along the way in ministry. Timothy is in the midst of serving a church that's experiencing some difficulties and fearful. And Paul writes to him in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 7. He said, "God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love and peace and a sound mind." And I think those words ring to us today. And so I think we not only need to hear that for ourselves, but also pass on that word. As maybe you're an older person of faith, you can say that to children or grandchildren. But we can be an example of choosing faith over fear. The next choice that we have is to choose peace over panic. And there is a lot of panic in our world, and there's a lot to be concerned about. But panic doesn't really help. Oftentimes, it's really peace in the midst of the storm that means the most. Jesus didn't get up in panic. Jesus got up and spoke a word of peace that was powerful and it was enduring. And I'm reminded, too, that Jesus, in John 14:27, was talking to disciples in a different storm. And it was a storm that was about to take place as he made his way to Jerusalem, would eventually give his life on Calvary before that first Easter when he was raised to new life. Jesus knew the turmoil, the storm that was going to come into the lives of the disciples. And so Jesus is talking to them about the Holy Spirit and to allow the Holy Spirit into your life. And Jesus said, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Not as the world gives do I give." Jesus has a word of peace for us this morning, and Jesus can calm the most raging storm in the seas and winds and waves of our lives and make an incredible difference. As I listened to a different governor this week, Governor Cuomo, he had some of the points for plans for responding to this. Of course, New York, particularly New York City, has been the hardest hit in our nation. And one of the points that he made was that we are socially distanced right now, but we need to be spiritually connected. And I thought that was really an amazing thing. Now, he didn't know exactly how we could be spiritually connected, but he knew it was really important. In the midst of these times when we're socially distanced and many of us feel isolated and sometimes alone in the storm, we need to feel spiritually connected. And the truth is, we are spiritually connected. How can we do that? I think that by praying for one another. Those in our family, our community, our country, and really those all around the world, because honestly, we're all in this together. And so to feel that spiritual connection. And as Tamara was talking with children this morning virtually, but to tell them to light a candle and put it in the window and to have a time of family prayer. And so, in the midst of the storm, you and I can choose peace over panic, and it's such an important choice to take. What are you going to choose this morning? Peace or panic? I encourage us to choose peace over panic. The final choice that we have, I think, is to choose helping over hoarding. I know that we all have our stories, and we've seen it online, all the stories that people went out in the midst of hearing we needed to be in our homes for a while, and they went and bought all the toilet paper on the shelves and all the hand sanitizer. I didn't believe it at first. My daughter called me. Sure enough, we went to the grocery store. It just looked like a tornado had went through there. And so we eventually found some toilet paper, but we left some for people who were coming after us. And you can see all kinds of stories online, and so you can see people hoarding. But there's also great stories of people helping each other. I'm just encouraged as I read some of the other news stories, like the call went out to build ventilators, and so sometimes we have car manufacturers building ventilators. We have My Pillow Company making masks for our healthcare workers who are in desperate need of that. An email went out to the woodworkers of Pioneer Village who work down at the state fair that if any of the woodworkers had N95 masks, to go ahead and take them to folks who are working at the nursing homes because they need them there. And so one of our folks, and I know other folks did it too, went and took all of his N95 masks and took them over to a nursing home so the workers there would have N95 masks so that they could serve safely. There's a lot of other people helping, and I just think of all the stories of just our healthcare workers who are really on the front line. Every day they're going to the hospital, they're going to the nursing home, they're really putting their lives on the line so they can help other people. And sometimes they even have to leave their kids for days and perhaps even weeks at a time at a relative so that they're as safe as possible as they go and serve those who are in need. And you and I can all do our best to help others and not hoard. There's some real blessings in that too. One of the stories that I love is that my daughter and I last year, about this very time, went to New York City with her school's choir group. And while we were there, we saw a Broadway show. Of course, we lift up our Broadway folks in prayer because they're out of work right now. But one of the Broadway shows we saw was Come From Away. And it's based on a true story that happened following 9/11. A number of aircraft that were in air had to be rerouted, and about 40 of them were rerouted to a small island, a small town in Gander, Newfoundland. And it was just a small town. It wasn't prepared for all the passengers on 40 planes because there was thousands of people that were there. And all of a sudden, they had to extend hospitality to these folks they didn't even know. It turns out that they called strangers those who were from away. And so it's Come From Away. And an unusually beautiful story unfolded there. In fact, they had a reunion 10 years later that Tom Brokaw did interviews with, and the play is actually based on the actual interviews. And so some of the stories were just amazing. So first of all, is that mayor decided what they were going to do was take the town's ice skating rink and make it into a giant walk-in freezer. So all the people from town brought their food, and they put it there, and then they began making meals for everybody. They found out that one man was Jewish and needed a kosher diet, and so they converted one area into a kosher kitchen, and another person was Muslim, and so he had some special dietary needs, and so they made accommodations for that as well. And then they told folks they were going to have a giant barbecue, and so they told these pastors just to go out into people's homes and to get their barbecue grills out of the backyard. And so one man related, he was African American. He said, where I'm from, if you're taking someone's grill out of their backyard as a black man, you can expect problems. And said, I was amazed because I went to take this grill out of this man's backyard, and this man opens the door and said, what are you doing? And I just said, I'm going to borrow the grill for the folks on the plane. And the man said, hey, I've got one in the garage as well, so make sure you take both of them. And so people's generosity was just overwhelming. They were there for a number of weeks, and at the end of that ordeal, they found that people who were completely different all of a sudden became best friends, not just with the folks who were stranded from the planes, but also with the townsfolk as they joined together and helped one another. And as they were going to leave, and the planes were given the signal they could take off, everybody that was on those planes went to the mayor and said, hey, how much do we owe you for all this? I mean, you've given us accommodations and meals, and we just can't even add it up. How much do we owe you? And the townsfolk, and the townsfolk looked and said, listen, you don't owe us anything. We did this to help you. And they were just amazed by their hospitality. And so at the end, the folks decided to pass the plate on the planes, and they created a scholarship fund for the kids of all those community folks who had helped them. Today, you and I are at a point where I think it's a defining moment in our life. And I know that we'd like 10 years from now to look back on this chapter of our lives and know it was a time when we were hoping rather than hoarding. That was a defining moment in their lives, and they did it and blessed people. I think there's some real hidden benefits in doing that. So if we choose hoping over hoarding, some amazing things can happen. One story that I liked that was in the news was early in this pandemic, there was a plane that came into LAX that had to be quarantined for 2 weeks, and the reporters were interviewing people afterwards and said, wasn't this a horrible experience? And one woman was sharing, she said, well, it was difficult, to take 2 weeks out and just be in one place with folks they don't really know. She said, but, there were some blessings as well. Not only did we develop some new friendships, she said, but there was a tax accountant on the plane, and he began to show us a lot about doing our taxes, and so we all know a little bit more about that. And she said there was a Zumba instructor, and so she taught us how to do Zumba, and so now we all know that. And she said then there was a guy who was a boxer, and so he taught us all how to box. And so there were some hidden blessings that we all experienced from that. And I think that if you and I are in a spirit of helping rather than hoarding, we'll find some hidden blessings in life. I know that the storm is real in all of our lives right now and those around the world. And many folks really in some serious wind and waves in this storm. But I believe that after the storm, there'll be a rainbow. And I believe that all of us can take a moment and focus on the story of Jesus calming the sea and listen to Jesus' voice of peace and calm. And you and I have the choice every day to choose faith over fear. We can choose peace over panic, and we can choose helping over hoarding. And when we do, we'll be making a difference not only for ourselves, but for our families and for our communities in a powerful way. I want to close with this thought, which is there's a story that I love from the early part of the 20th century. And it's of a young man who was a telegraph operator, and he was seeking a job. And so he found an employment ad to go and apply for a job as a telegraph operator. And he walked into the lobby area of this company and was told to have a seat in the lobby, and there were a number of other young men and women in that lobby. And then after a few minutes, there was all kinds of noise and what have you coming from the other room, but this young man got up and just walked through the doors. And 5 or 10 minutes later, the manager came out with this young man and said, well, we've made our hire, we're going to hire this young man. And all the other people that were sitting in the lobby were upset about that. And they said, well, we didn't get a chance to interview. And the man said, well, let me just explain what happened here. While you were all in the lobby here, we had a message going on the other side of the door in Morse code, which is a vital key for being a telegraph operator. And the message said this: if you hear this message, get up and walk through the door. And this man did exactly that. So we hired him. There's a lot of noise in our life, including the wind and waves from very real storms. But I think if we listen carefully, we can hear Jesus whisper, peace be still, to all of us. And with that encouragement, you and I have the power to choose faith over fear. We have the power to choose peace over panic. And we have the power to choose helping over hoarding. Would you join me in prayer? Lord, this morning, many of us all over the world are having a moment where we do indeed feel like we're in the storm. But we know that after the storm will be a rainbow. And even in the midst of the winds and waves of this storm, like the disciples, help us to hear your voice saying, peace, be still. Help us to quiet our hearts and to reach out to loved ones and neighbors all over the world and have a time when we pray for each other and we help each other. Help us to find new faith that helps us to push back from the fear. Help us to find the strength and peace that helps us to push back from panic. And help us have a renewed sense of helping others rather than hoarding, that we can make a difference in our world. And years from now, let us look back and say, this was a time when we really learned to love and serve God and love and serve neighbor. And it became a defining moment in our lives, a time in which we also touch others through Christ our Lord. Amen.